Hello, everyone. We are back again for a new series of Call My Supervisor, the PhD podcast for the School of Politics and Economics here at King's College London. We can't believe they've let us do it all again for a third series. You know the format by now, but for those who are new, in this series we'll be speaking to doctoral candidates from one of our departments to pick their brains about all things PhD, from their research and ideas to their revelations and advice. My name is Daniel Mansfield, and I'm the Communications Officer for the School of Politics and Economics here at King's. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our guest for this episode, Kai Steemers, a doctoral candidate studying with the Department of Political Economy. Kai, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Good stuff. So let's make a start. Kai, can you introduce your research? Give us the title if you've got it, and just a very brief overview of what's going on.
Yeah, so my rough PhD title, thesis title is The Evolution of Pro-European Contestation Across the UK Post-Brexit. It's about contestation over Europe. Specifically, it looks at pro-European organisations, activists and campaigns in the UK, and how they've evolved since 2020. So are the people involved still the same? How have their motivations changed? What are the issues that the movement as a whole is concerned with? How has their argumentation changed? Really focusing predominantly on discourse. So as a kind of pretext, you had a very significant pro-European movement built around trying to stop Brexit between kind of 2016 and 2019. And it was unsuccessful. So I suppose my research is asking what's next. Do they try campaigning for rebuilding relations with the EU, rejoining Erasmus, rejoining single market and customs union, or even, rejoining the EU? Or, as I'm starting to find out, are they campaigning against other things, campaigning against the Elections Act that introduced voter ID requirements, the Policing Crime and Sentencing Act that limits protest, or the retained EU law bill that's set out to revoke EU laws and protections in the UK. So it's kind of trying to understand, what are the things that they're campaigning on? How have their arguments changed? Are they still fighting for Europe, and if they are, how are they constructing it? What is it based around? What's this vision of Europe based around?
Would you say is it a comparative study then? Is it looking at them, this is what they did and this is what they're doing now, or is it something else?
Yeah, so I mean, I think naturally by using discourse, you are kind of one of the benefits of looking at discourse is that you can track change over time. So there is an element of comparing what they were before to now. One of the chapters that I'm working on essentially looks at time slices at various periods and comparing, what are the different things that they're campaigning on, what are the frames specifically that they're using. My recently published article was kind of a little bit of a comparison of, okay, this is what they did before in the kind of anti-Brexit movement, and a specific rejoin campaign, this is what they're talking about now. Have they learned some of the lessons from the past? Are they doing things differently? So yeah, I suppose there definitely is a comparative element.
How hard has it been to keep track of everyone involved? Has there been a fragmentation? I know social media is fragmented a little bit in recent times. Has that made your job more difficult, trying to find where they are now, at least?
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, my recent article did use X or Twitter data over a kind of 7-month period. That was actually kind of stopped because Elon Musk took over Twitter and essentially blocked a lot of the ability to do that for a significant time period, although people are finding ways around it. In terms of trying to kind of work out the network of organizations and activists, Yeah, there's a lot of desk research involved, and there's a lot of defunct websites. But that kind of tells its own tale of what's happened to the pro-European movement. It used to have, I mean, it still has a lot of local organizations, local groups, sorry, but it did have more, and a lot of them have kind of folded. So, you had some little town which had its own group of pro-European activists, and they, ran out of steam or for whatever reason stopped paying for their website. And so, but there are websites out there where, because activists, one of the a useful thing for activists to do is map out their own network. And so, because it enables you to find connections, it enables people to find their local groups and connect with other groups and talk about tactics and talk about meeting up and these kind of things. So pro-European movement actually very, very rapidly generated a kind of huge network of organizations, which is available online. UK, PEN. There are other sites as well, like Grassroots for Europe keeps a log of their groups, European Movement UK as well. And so through going through all of their websites, you can kind of find the ones that are still there. And I went, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about methodology later, but I went through all of those websites of hundreds of groups and checking if they're still active, checking their Facebook pages, their Twitter pages, their websites, contacting all of them for interviews and to disseminate my survey as well. So yeah, if it's out there, if it's been put out there, you can find it. And also, there's other tools out there like Internet Archive, which is essentially a tool to go back and look at web pages from the past, and it takes like snapshots of web pages, which is really, really useful because organizations change their web pages and web pages get deleted or whatever, and it's been a really useful tool for me especially with looking at how the discourse has evolved over time. Because on Twitter, it's quite easy to go back and see some people can delete tweets, fair enough, but with web pages, it's a lot harder. So the Internet Archive makes that a lot easier, and it's fairly commonly used in academic research that's become more reliant on web-based methods.
So what is it about this subject that interests you? Why did you pick it for your PhD?
I think what drew me to it is probably slightly different from what now interests me about it. So initially, I was just very much interested in the UK's relationship with the EU. I grew up with a British German mother and a Dutch father. 90% of my kind of extended family lives in the EU. We're pretty close, even though we are a very big family. So I started researching the UK EU relationship for my MPhil degree at my previous university. But I was looking at leave voters, so people that voted for the UK to leave the EU, and specifically I was looking at how national identity influenced their decision. And during that process, I became kind of surprised by the overwhelming obsession with leave voters within academic literature. So the kind of left behind is a narrative that's often talked about which was a real focus in the UK for a time being. But Euroscepticism in general has kind of dominated literature on the politicization of Europe since the Maastricht Treaty. So I became interested in the attachment people still had to the EU, and pro-European activism was a good kind of a good prism through which to look at that. A lot of people said to me when I first started in 2021, oh, do they even exist anymore? And initially it did worry me in the early stages of my research, but actually they do. And while they're not, hundreds of thousands marching in like they did in kind of like 2018, 2019, they are continuing to keep this thing going. and they've had like a few small wins here and there. The National Rejoin March, which is what my recent paper was on, still holds marches of about kind of 15-20,000 every year in London. And there are, lots of smaller groups across the country having local meetings. But yeah, a lot of the kind of big organizations that were present in the anti-Brexit movement, so like European Movement, UK, Best for Britain, Open Britain, another Europe is Possible, which is slightly smaller, but they do continue to campaign, but on a lot of different issues that aren't just about rejoining the EU, which for a time was kind of like a bit of a no-go area for large campaign organizations. So they focused on things like democracy and rights and Ukraine and anti-racism, that kind of thing that fits within the broader ideology, the broader frame of pro-European activism and the pro-European movement, but doesn't really directly say, we should. Well, the European movement definitely does say we should, rejoin Erasmus and that kind of thing. But for a time, it was all about kind of protecting what we have, stopping, like I said earlier, stopping the erosion of democratic rights that kind of took place between 2020 and 2023, 2024. And, other kind of attacks on liberal democracy with Ukraine and the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So, and as well as migrant rights as well. That was another big one, where with post-Brexit, the settled status scheme, there was pretty harsh conditions for European nationals who had settled in the UK. So they were kind of campaigning on the defensive, which is what I sort of talked about at the start, but which has meant that kind of offering a vision of what Europe could be has been pushed a bit further down the line. And also Europe itself has changed as well. So especially in recent elections. So making that kind of, because this is, pretty much a liberal movement, and lots of what's going on across the nation states of the EU right now is fairly illiberal. And so making that kind of progressive case has become harder as well.
So what about the research and your research methods involved? I mean, it seems to me like you've done a lot of scrolling through pages, staring at screens. That's a lot of paracetamol for the headaches and stuff. But, is it that and more? What's gone on?
So in terms of the methods that I've used, the first is something called discourse network analysis, which is essentially category-based content analysis. So like say, scrolling through web pages and essentially coding various themes or frames, combined with quantitative network analysis. So you have, in my case, a bunch of social media posts or web pages. I then go through and code these for various themes, arguments, and the actor that said them. And then I make a network of actors connected by their shared use of concepts, or I make a network of concepts connected by their shared use by actors. And so what you can achieve by doing that is you can see which actors are important within the network, which concepts are important, which concepts are connected to one another very strongly, which actors are connected to one another very strongly. And it's a really useful for analyzing change over time. So like I was talking about briefly earlier, I can compare how the concept network, so the network of themes and arguments that actors within my group of actors within that network are making, the arguments they're making, and then compare it to 2020 to 2024 and see how, what different themes have become more important, which is a neat tool. It took me a while to learn it because it's it has its own software, and you have to learn about about kind of a bit of maths. But it's been a rewarding experience actually to learn a new method, and I also think it gives my research a kind of slightly more unique element. Than, not to say that interviews and surveys aren't important. I just think it adds a little bit more intrigue, and especially the fact that I'm doing it with social movements, which is, I mean, fairly novel. I have also conducted 45-hour-long interviews with activists across the UK. Um, Initially, I was really keen to compare how activists in Scotland, Wales, and England talked about their activism, and it was a good way to do that, despite the movement mainly being focused in the south of England. But I kind of, the interviews took this kind of narrative approach. So I got them to talk about, when they first got involved, and then what had changed between like 2019, 2020, and then how is it, essentially getting them to take me through their story as an activist. And it was really interesting. I got a lot of, I mean, it took a lot of time, but I got a lot of interesting thoughts, and it kind of it gave me more context to what's been happening in the movement, besides just kind of looking at it from a top-down approach. And then lastly, my most recent method that I deployed was that I designed a survey, which I am kind of semi in the process of analyzing. And it went out to, so all of the people I interviewed, I essentially used them as a kind of distribution network to go back to networks, to distribute my survey, and send it to all of their private WhatsApp groups, private Facebook pages, and get people to fill that out. And there's been some interesting findings. A few of the questions I mirrored from a previous survey, which my supervisor conducted for his book with another academic. And so I'm able to like see, okay, what are the things that have maybe become more important, what's changed. And so I like the fact that my research has a lot of these different sources, because I can kind of triangulate a little bit. And but I think it just really paints the whole picture, is really what gives. It's good for kind of a holistic understanding of what is this movement, how has it evolved, what's important to it. And yeah, when I was doing it, it felt like quite a lot of graft. But the more, like, I've gone back to doing some discourse network analysis now, and I'm so much quicker at it. And this, when you first start doing it, there's a lot of trial and error, even with interviews, because I think a lot of people assume that, an academic interview, you just sit there and you have a list of questions and you ask them, but you very quickly realize that you actually need to be quite reflexive and adapt to different people and different situations, because activists in particular hold very strong opinions, and they're very inquisitive, and they want to know about what you're doing and what your motivations are. They ask, I got asked so many times, am I pro-European? I also got told quite a few times that they were expecting me to have a Dutch accent, which is quite funny. But yeah, in the method side, yeah, I didn't travel for any of my interviews. I will say that I only did online. I actually, there was one, but it was only because it was in London. I was like, and they wanted to do it in person. I was like, yeah, sure. But yeah, all completed on screens. Just because I was interviewing activists from across the UK, and save money and save time and also because you need to fit into other people's schedule. I think that's another thing. These people they're doing this for free, and they're helping you out because they care about it. But also you want to make it easy for them, especially with the movement I'm looking at. These are, I mean, this is probably a counterpoint, but they are older people, so they're less likely to be able to, maybe travel for you. So yeah, and I just felt I have a lot of data that I wanted to collect, and doing it over Teams or whatever was a lot easier.
So discourse network analysis, presumably when you started day one of this PhD, you didn't know that's where it was going to go. How do you sit there and come to the conclusion that, okay, this is what I need to do? And how then do you go, I need to learn this, this, and this to be able to do this process? Like that's,
Yeah.
is this just like created from scratch?
Look, some people come into the PhD knowing exactly what they're going to do, and there may be, and don't get me wrong, I had thought about PhD for a while, but going into it, I didn't know I was going to do discourse network analysis. No, my supervisors suggested it to me. Neither of them had actually done it themselves, but one of them had read it, or two of them, they'd both read it, or read it being used, and suggested it to me. And initially, I was very hesitant because I was like, this feels very complex. Feels like a lot, I would have to learn a lot. But I just kind of dived right into it. And I think sometimes you're going to go down rabbit holes in your PhD where they're going to lead to nothing. And you have to be willing for that to happen. And in your first year, especially, I feel like you go down quite a few rabbit holes. You'll read a lot of things that you'll never use. You'll attempt a lot of things that you will never be published or written about. But you kind of refine your process. And actually the things, most of my what I consider successes in this process have come from just going for it and just kind of like embracing it, and just, look, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But and you are limited in time in some respects, but you do have time to try out some things. And so I started messing around with it. There wasn't that much online. There was some publications, and this guy who developed the method had written quite extensively about it. So I started trying it out. I went to a workshop which the guy who created the method was running in the Netherlands, and it was helpful. And look, I'm definitely not an expert at it, and my use of it is, I believe, quite rudimentary. But I'm able to show things with it. And I think, it doesn't always have to be the most complicated metric. As long as it shows what you want it to show, then that's all you need from it. And I've, at the very least, I've been able to make some very nice diagrams, which look impressive, actually, even if what they're actually showing is just fairly, simple stuff. A big part of research and is kind of presentation of data and making it understandable and interesting as well. And I think that this method's really allowed me to do that. And I'm hoping, because right now I'm at a point where I'm at a certain level with it, and I don't really at this point, because I've probably got maybe 9 months left of my PhD. And at this point, I don't, or maybe slightly longer, but I don't really have the time to develop it further. I've gotten to a certain point, and I think maybe if I'm able to do a postdoc, it's something that I would like to look to continue to develop as a skill. But yeah, at this point, it's good enough to do what I want it to do. I think it looks pretty cool, and yeah, it's definitely been worth it. It's something that I'm quite proud of, the fact that I just went for it, and no regrets about that.
Okay, so you kind of alluded to it already, but you're about 3 years and a bit into your PhD. It looks like you're coming into the home straight. What's left for you from here? What are you doing now?
So at the moment, I am finishing up some analysis, doing a lot of writing, and I'm writing another paper, a co-author paper with my supervisor. I am, submitting papers to conferences. I'm kind of just tying up a lot of loose ends, but also moving forward. It's one of those ones, like, you're getting to the point now where, like I kind of have alluded to, I don't really have time to dwell on things too much. But I have some kind of confidence in what I've built already. It's just about keeping going.
So, without giving away the trade secrets, is there anything that's stood out for you or a conclusion that's been particularly surprising from your work so far?
Well, like I kind of mentioned earlier, a lot of people told me, are there even any pro-European activists still out there? And there are. They are different to your average activist. This isn't like a traditionally kind of radical cause. This isn't like Extinction Rebellion. These are older people who tending to be older people. There are young pro-European activists, but they definitely are on the older side. And they you know I think there are quite a few of them. I think and there's quite a few kind of dormant pro-Europeans as well. They when I talk to activists, they say, we used to have a lot more members, but people's jobs and lives got in the way, and kind of the potential to stop Brexit kind of went out the window once Boris Johnson came into power. So yeah, I suppose the fact that they're still there and they're still pushing. I think that the fact that that a lot of the organizations have kind of changed tack in terms of what their focus is slightly is very interesting. This kind of refocusing on, in some degrees, kind of like democratic backsliding that took place under the Conservative government. I think the thing that's kind of frustrated me a little bit about the movement is this kind of continued lack of a vision of what the EU or Europe could be. It's still kind of couched in quite, you know, traditional views about what the EU is, that even though there are kind of progressive activists within it, even though they stand for a lot of very progressive causes, but I think that reflects kind of what the EU is and what's achievable and this kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, I think I would have liked to see more of an emphasis on this kind of idea of what can the EU offer in terms of, shared sovereignty, rather than just which there has been people are doing that, but yeah, so the movement really has its limitations, and part of that is because it hasn't been able to bring in many new activists as well. So you don't have that kind of those new ideas coming into it so much. But the organizations are, attempting to find, they're finding new things to campaign on, and the local activists are really, putting in some hard graft. These people have really dedicated, thousands of hours to this cause, and it's really admirable. And a lot of the things that they fought for are very important.
I think for the first part, we're just going to wrap up by asking, can we get a shout out for your supervisors, please?
Yeah, so my supervisors are Professor Adam Fagan and Dr. Isabel Hertner.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kai, for your reflections on your PhD for part one. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back in part two, we're going to speak to you about your personal reflections of the process. Come back in a minute. Okay, welcome back, everybody. In the first part, we spoke to Kai about the logistics of his PhD, and in this second half, we're going to speak to him more about his personal experience. So we're going to kick off by asking Kai, what attracted you to a PhD in the first place?
I think there were both push and pull factors at play. So I do really enjoy research. I really enjoy finding out things and trying to work out how to find out things, and then I am really interested in politics. I think it's it is I believe it's a privilege to kind of wake up in the morning and go and pursue something you're interested in. And then on the flip side, Honestly, I was quite unhappy with my job at the time of applying. It was in the middle of COVID, and I just made a decision that I needed to change my life quite dramatically. So I both applied for a new job and applied for the PhD at the same time. I got the new job straight away, which was a notable upgrade. And then I got accepted onto the PhD pretty soon after. And so 9 months after applying, I left the new job and started my PhD. I know I haven't, finished yet, but I do think that that decision was genuinely one of the best decisions I have made, at least at the moment. I still believe that.
And how has the process differed from your expectations, or has it differed? I mean, for example, a lot of the people we speak to say that they weren't prepared for just how self-directed the PhD is. Is that similar in your case or completely different?
Yeah, so I know for a lot of people, they talk about the PhD as a very kind of solitary pursuit, and I know for some people that is the case. For me, it really hasn't been. I mean, just on like a social level, I have made so many new friends through this process, and I was quite lucky. I just, when I started, there were people who were similar to me, and we got along. And it's a very like it was a really it has been a really friendly environment, and through kind of socializing, I guess. I really do believe that it's led to kind of better outputs for me, at least. I'm maybe to the annoyance of some of my friends, that I bounce ideas off of them quite a lot, and that's really useful. And also, because they're my friends and we talk about what we're going through, have a very like you kind of get an idea of where others are at, and it encourages me. Like if I hear, oh, my friend is applying to conferences, then I'm like, oh, I could apply to conferences. Or I hear my friend is like submitting a journal article, I'm like, oh, I could submit a journal article maybe. So there's that kind of like, and it's not competitive, it's like it's very much like supportive, and I think I have been quite lucky in that. But it's also like something that I feel like as a group we've attempted to foster as well. And I think that's just natural when you're friends with one another, because it's not all just talking about work. In fact, works in most conversations it's completely secondary or tertiary. And then there's this also kind of, by making friends in the office and stuff, it encourages you to take breaks. So I'd say in terms of the process of PhD, I think, I was always told that it's quite lonely and quite like and it can be tough because of that. But for me, just the situation that I've been through, it hasn't been like that, and I'm really grateful for that, because I know that there's probably some luck involved there as well.
We may have already covered this, but then perhaps a different answer that you want to give. But is there anything that has particularly helped you during the PhD? So it might be a person, a thing, a learning device.
So yeah, obviously, like I've mentioned, the friends that I've made have been great, but also my supervisors. Yeah, I mean, my primary supervisor, Adam, is really the reason why I decided to come to King's over other universities. He was so passionate and really believed in me, and that support has kind of only really grown throughout the process, which has been really validating, honestly. He always says to me, when you first came in here, you were, really shy and nervous, and like he says, like when I talk about my research now, I'm much more confident and this kind of thing. And then similarly, my secondary supervisor Isabel has been amazing, and she's kind of a nice counterbalance to Adam in terms of her approach, and I think they really work well together. And I think that supervisor PhD relationship, I think, is really important. I think it's important in terms of like a kind of just being able to feel comfortable in showing them your work, but also there is like a kind of pastoral element when you're finding things tough, and your ability to, or their ability to feel like they can then help you, and also just being just incredibly smart. Like they're both incredible academics. So yeah, for me, maybe there are some websites. I can't think of any websites or software or anything. I mean, aside from the discourse network and analyzer and R and all the things that I use. But to be honest, it does come down to people for me at the end of the day. And I think picking that supervisor, the one that you kind of feel like you get along with, is quite important.
What are the challenges, and on the flip side, what are the challenges of the PhD, or is there something in particular that was most challenging for you?
There's been a few. I mean, learning new things always comes with problems, but when you work them out, it is rewarding. I hope that I've kind of put that across a little bit. I think one challenge when you first start as a teaching assistant is balancing teaching commitments with research. It does become easier over time, but when I first started, I was a bit more of a perfectionist when it came to just like, I was just worried about, not knowing something when a student asked me a question, or that kind of thing. So I put a lot of time and effort into teaching, which is important as well. But my research maybe suffered a little bit at the time, just because I was, it's like starting a new job or that kind of thing. You're always going to be a bit more exhausted at the end of the day. I think another pressure, there is this other pressure during your PhD. If you want to go into academia, this kind of pressure to produce publications while still completing your PhD, and that kind of speaks to a bigger challenge that is the kind of future beyond the PhD. I really would love to be an academic, and it is a very difficult job market, and a lot of academics are some of the most downbeat people you will speak to about careers in academia, and it's because they know how competitive it is. And also, I would like to say neither of my supervisors are downbeat for my future at all. They're much more upbeat than I am. But you do really have to have faith in yourself. You have to have faith in your research, in the kind of scholar that you've become. And I think for me, a big part of that feeling like I am good enough has come from the support that I've received from my supervisors. They've just been really really supportive.
So what advice would you give to someone who's perhaps coming to the end of their MA and they're like, shall I do a PhD? Or perhaps someone who's in the private sector and they're thinking about applying. What advice would you give to them?
So I worked for about 2 years before starting my PhD. So like I was talking about earlier, there was a kind of a bit of a push factor for me from that. And I think I've highlighted this already, but do a lot of research on your potential supervisors. Make contact with them far in advance, build a rapport, and think about whether they're the right fit for you, whether they are, because it's good to have, if you're someone that maybe needs a bit of support and like confidence boosting, you want a supervisor who's gonna provide you that, as opposed to one who's maybe going to be a little bit colder. So the best situation is where you have a pair of supervisors that are a match for your research and also you as a person. And I feel very fortunate that I think I have that. The second bit of advice, and then this kind of probably feeds off themes earlier as well, is that this doesn't have to be this experience where you're locked in a dark room with your laptop and a pile of books. And I know that my research methods maybe might make you think it is like that, but it really isn't. I've had so many amazing opportunities to go to conferences all across the world, speak to incredibly interesting people, and also go to the pub after work and chat with my mates. So even if it's not in your nature, I think it's beneficial to kind of try and go out of your way to chat to people in your cohort, because you're both doing a PhD, or like you're all doing PhD. So you might find that there are people that are similar to you, because I think, it does take a kind of specific set of a few personality traits or even just interests that take people to doing a PhD. So yeah.
And what would you tell yourself on day one of your PhD, knowing what you know now?
Maybe just like don't fret. I mean, I have to admit that, like I've already mentioned, the PhD was quite a freeing experience for me, um, and a kind of a burden was really lifted, and so I was full of energy, excitement, but also nerves, and I think that sometimes the nerves can hold you back from doing things, which is good to avoid. And then also just, I mean, jumping off that nerves point, just go dive in at the deep end with like applying for things and like applying for conferences, and just you might not think your research is that good, but it probably is actually a lot better than you think it is. And bounce your ideas off of your supervisors and ask them whether they think you should apply for this thing. And try, like, you're kind of like in control of your own destiny to a significant extent, and I advise you to take advantage of that opportunity, I guess.
Okay, so last question. What is the PhD community like? What's it like being a part of that?
I feel like I've covered this a little bit, but my experience is that it's great. I have friends that I hopefully going to have for the rest of my life, and I think that because I joined post COVID, and so it was kind of a bit weird at the start. Like there wasn't a lot of people coming in, but coming to the office, and I was coming in every day. And so I just eventually we just built this kind of community. And I think that, don't get me wrong, there are other groups that have that people have their own groups and stuff. But everyone, irrespective of like what group you're in or who you're friends with, everyone is generally very polite and sweet. So yeah, I think the PhD community is good. It's not, I think there's this like fear that it's going to be like hyper competitive because you have a lot of people who love academia or love like studying and research, and also there's like a hyper competitive job market, and so you have to work really hard especially if you want to stay in academia. But I think for me, I think at King's, there is a standard that is pretty good, and however it doesn't come into making things feel competitive, which is nice.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Kai. And that brings an end to today's episode. I'd like to thank Kai for sharing his thoughts and insights for this episode. And of course, thanks to you, our listeners, for taking the time to tune in today. We look forward to welcoming you again soon for our next episode. Take care.